Good Money, Better Life: The Psychology of Money, featuring John Coleman. How much is enough? Is money the ultimate goal, and what happens if we get there? How do we balance the survival of scarcity and the abundance of wealth? In this episode, we sit down with John Coleman, author of Good Money: 6 Steps to Building a Financial Life with Purpose, to explore the powerful and often overlooked connection between money and well-being. Together, we unpack how financial mindsets formed in childhood shape our adult lives, relationships, and decision making. John shares why money should be viewed as a tool rather than a destination, and how the pursuit of wealth can sometimes pull people further away from fulfillment. The conversation dives into the comparison trap and why more money doesn't always mean more happiness, how financial stress can precede substance use and mental health challenges, why traditional retirement may not support long-term well-being, the role of financial conversations in therapy and recovery work, and practical ways families can build healthier relationships with money. This episode challenges the way we think about success, encouraging a shift from chasing wealth to building a life grounded in purpose, values, and connection.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Before we learn about this episode's guest, I want to take a quick minute to share something exciting. Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast now offers free continuing education credits for select episodes, currently approved through IPGGC for gambling counseling credentials, with more approving bodies on the way. You can check out what's available at andrewjschreier.com/continuing-education. I'm really proud of what we built there, and I can't wait to share more with you. Now, let's get into today's conversation. John Coleman is an investor, author, and speaker whose work explores the intersection of faith, purpose, and finance. He serves as co-CEO of Sovereign's Capital, a values-driven investment firm active in public equities, private equity, and venture capital, and is a co-founder of the faith-driven investor movement. A frequent contributor to Harvard Business Review, his writing has also appeared in Forbes, The Washington Post, The New York Times, Financial Times, and Los Angeles Times. His books include Passion and Purpose, The HBR Guide to Crafting Your Purpose, and even a novel, Miracles. A graduate of Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School, Coleman and his wife live in Atlanta with their 4 children, pursuing the good life he teaches, one marked by purpose, generosity, and faithful stewardship. You can learn more about John in the podcast notes. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, we want to welcome John Coleman. Thanks for joining.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, you are the author of Good Money: 6 Steps to Building a Financial Life with Purpose. Before we get into the book, which I'm really excited to talk about, can you give listeners just a little bit of a background about yourself?
Yeah, so I grew up in the South. I was actually born in Florida before moving to Georgia. When I was born, my dad was a rodeo cowboy and my mom cut hair. So it was like a country music beginning, so to speak. And we grew up in Columbus, Georgia after that. Went to school in Georgia at a school called Berry College. And then I've really navigated my career dominantly in the investment world since then. So I started off in management consulting, did a lot of investing. I've always been a writer. And so there are these 2 threads in my career. One has been this working in finance, around money, around people with money, getting measured by how much money I can create. And then the other was writing. And a lot of my writing over the years has really focused on this idea of purpose, meaning, and human flourishing. A lot of that with Harvard Business Review, which published this book. So around 15 years ago, I did a book called Passion and Purpose with HBR. And since that time, I've been one of their key writers on this idea of purpose at work, meaning, building a flourishing life. And so this book is kind of a neat one because it's at the intersection of those 2 professional paths, this writing about purpose and meaning, and also this world of money and finance that I live in day to day. And then the only other thing to mention is I'm a dad. I got a wife. I got 4 kids. If I look tired today, it's because mom was out of town this weekend, and I had all the kids, and my 5-year-old was in my room at 3 a.m. this morning. So your listeners will have to forgive me if I blank at any point. Perils of being a father of young kids, right?
Yeah, that's great. I think our conversation will be lively enough to keep it going. So I do want to thank you. When I got this offer for you to be on the podcast guest, I tell listeners who can't see us that in the back of my office here I've got a bookshelf, and the top shelf is all books that podcast guests have given me, so authors that have shared their work. And if you were to run down the list, if you were to look at all the guests that I've had, you wouldn't find one that necessarily talks about money in the way that you do in your book. And I want to use that to kind of set the stage for our conversation, because I think we talk about money when it comes to counseling, mental health. We talk about money when it comes to access to treatment and needing to have funding. We talk about money and how someone who's struggling with substance use or mental health, how that impacts finances. One thing I think we don't do very well is address finances in general and the impact it has on people's well-being. So when I got this book, I was like, where has this been to have this talk or conversation about money that I never had growing up in school, that was never taught to me growing up? And it's also something that we don't always address in things like counseling and therapy, even though finances has quite a significant impact on our overall well-being. So I'm curious, your thoughts into where I'm coming from walking into this conversation, and what I'm really hoping that listeners can take away on this idea of money, and sometimes where we think we know about it, but we don't really talk about it. There's so much that we sort of tiptoe around. It's a very taboo, sensitive topic. So where are you with some of those initial thoughts that I'm throwing at you?
Yeah, totally. Well, the dirty little secret of authors, especially guys who have day jobs, is we often write books about things we want to learn about. And so that's one of the reasons I got into this purpose in human flourishing beat is I was thinking through that in my career. I was like, man, I really want my work to matter. I want my life to matter. I want to live in a way that leads to the good life, but I'm not sure how to do that. And I find that I learn something best when I'm writing about it because I have to go on this deep exploration where I learn it well enough to explain it to others or to communicate what I've understood to others. And I found the same thing you did, which was there wasn't a book about money and the good life, right? There are a lot of books that are practical tips about money. And those are important, the save, spend, invest, and how to do a mortgage and that kind of stuff. And I do think that's important. There are a few books on money and happiness, right? Which is kind of a narrower version. I didn't really see anyone who had had experience in this space writing about the intersection of money and the good life. Like, how can money be a good thing in your life rather than a bad thing? And that sounds like such a weird thing to say, honestly, because I think the natural reaction for most listeners will be, of course, money's a good thing. Like, like how can money be a bad thing? But I'll tell you what I've witnessed over time, and some of your listeners may be sensitive to this because money can enable bad things in a person's life, right? The wrong values and mindsets around money can destroy a financial life, but it can also destroy a personal life. I get the privilege today, as I mentioned, when I was born, we lived in a trailer park, so I've kind of lived with less than we needed. And now I'm often around people who have much more than they need. And what's interesting to me is the number of truly wealthy people that you engage with who are unhappy, who have broken families, who have made terrible mistakes with their lives, enabled by the wrong mindsets around monies is enormous, right? And I remind people all the time, it's much harder to be poor than rich, right? The problems of poverty are much more acute and damaging than those of having too much. But I find that we don't have social conversations about what does the good life look like and how is money an enabler to that in any sort of disciplined way. We just assume money is a given. And so it becomes this thing that we chase because it's concrete, right? It's hard to measure how good are my relationships. It's hard to measure how good's the family. Am I living a purposeful life? But man, when you see the paycheck, when you see your investment portfolio, you actually know how you're doing, right? And so we become fixated on it in an unhealthy way, often at the exclusion of these more meaningful things. And that's one of the principles of this book is money is one of the few things in life that we need. It is essential to human flourishing to have financial and material stability, but it's one of the only things that's essential to flourishing that's a means, not an end, right? The truly meaningful things are relationships, a sense of transcendence, character and virtue, meaning and purpose, health, spiritual, mental, and physical health, happiness. Money is not intrinsically good. More money isn't necessarily better. Money is only an enabler to the intrinsically good things. And if we make it too central, it can actually crowd out those most more important things and distract us from them. And that's the central tension that I try and walk through in the book, both philosophically and with a series of practices.
Yeah, even in the part as you were saying that, I was flipping through stuff, and one of the things I wanted to make sure to highlight and talk about was this part of our crisis of purpose. You mentioned when you don't have enough money or health or safety, life is genuinely worse. But after a certain threshold, it's what you do with that money and how you fashion your life that matters most to flourishing. It's sort of like, what is that amount where we need to have so we're not in that health and safety risk, but also once we pass that, it doesn't seem like it takes that much more to all of a sudden tip to the other side of then having too much, which then can create all those things that you were. So it's such a delicate balance that even the numbers can't help us to, all the mathing can't answer that, right?
That question of how much is enough, like it's really funny because almost no one has an answer to that, right? And this is as old as time. Like one of the examples I use in the book is actually a Leo Tolstoy short story called How Much Land Does a Man Need? Tolstoy was this famous Russian writer, and there's this person, Pahom, who's trying to acquire land. And he gets a deal from a local tribe effectively that he can have as much land for a sum of money he's paying him as he can walk around in a day. And Pahom, who's really greedy, walks so fast and so hard during the course of that day that at the end of this press, he almost doesn't make it back. He pushes himself really hard and he falls dead at the finish line. And Tolstoy concludes by saying he just got, he ended up with enough land to fit his casket, basically. And the funny thing is, we're all on this treadmill, right? I review a survey in the book where the Harris poll asked about 2,000 people how much is enough at different levels of median income. And the funny thing was at every median income, the answer was more, right? At $25,000 a year in household income, people thought 40,000 would make them happy. At 70,000, they thought it was 100,000. At 250,000, they thought it was 350,000. The truth was, because we elevate our lifestyle and expectations at every level of income, and we don't think thoughtfully about what actually makes us happy, what do we need? If you don't reflect on that, the answer to how much is enough is always more. And this has been true. There's a great John D. Rockefeller quote when he was the richest man in history. A reporter asked him, John, you've got so much. How much is enough? And he said, just a little bit more. Right? And we all live that way. But that's the cycle we fall in. And there are a couple of terms that can describe that. One is the comparison trap, and that's why we elevate our lifestyles. We don't think about how much is enough for us to live a lifestyle we want. We think how much is enough to be relevant to our neighbors, to the people that we see around us. And the problem is, as you get richer, what happens? Your neighbors get richer, your friends get richer, right? And so you're always, until you're Elon Musk, maybe, you always get dissatisfied that there's someone ahead of you. I remember walking into a restaurant with a billionaire one time, and he knew every single person in that restaurant that was ahead of him on the Forbes 500 list. He was deeply insecure about it. And that never stops. And that's based on something in psychology called hedonic adaptation, which is human beings are wired to be acquisitive. And what hedonic adaptation, sometimes called the hedonic treadmill, is that whenever we see something we want, like let's say you see a car, you think, man, that car would be awesome. That's my dream car. The good and the sad thing is when you get that car, suddenly you have a new dream car almost right away. You see the problems with it. You get that dream house. You think about a better house. You think about a vacation house. So that new thing you thought would make you happy becomes your baseline, and you're chasing this new level of happiness. And there's a good part of that in human psychology that causes us to aspire, to create, to do positive things. But the negative is we can become obsessed with chasing things that won't actually make us happy. And the thing I'll end on there, and sorry for speaking so long, is on the answer of how much is enough. There was a famous study by two Nobel Prize winners about a decade ago, named Daniel Kahneman and Angus Deaton, very famous guys. And they actually did a comprehensive survey of like, at what level of money do people stop being marginally more happy once they reach that level? And the truth was, in today's dollars, at that time they identified $75,000 a year in income. Today that would be about 110, 105, or 110. That's lower than most people would assume. It's high. That's a lot of money, but you're not making $1 million a year, not $1 billion a year. That after that threshold, your material needs are satisfied. Your health, your wellness, you got clothes, you got a house, you got good food. And so other things then contribute far more to happiness. And if you think the things you acquire will make you happy, you can sometimes lose sight of those things that actually will pass that threshold.
And one of the things they talked about, because as you were describing all that, I was thinking of also the comparison trap that you mentioned in the book, but also where I am right here. It's the explicit and implicit messages are hard to ignore. Your self-worth is connected to how much money you have. And
Totally.
that's a huge part often that I see where someone sees their their bank worth is their self-worth. Their net worth is their measure of self-esteem. And that usually is not healthy. That usually does not end positively. It's
No, and
yeah.
we as human beings, our dignity and our worth has nothing to do with our financial condition. Like every person on this planet has incredible dignity and worth. And the simple example is, you know, do you think in 100 years we're going to still be talking about Mother Teresa or Jamie Dimon? Like we know intuitively that a person's worth, even their impacts on the world, is not the amount of money that they accumulated. It's the positive influence that they had on others. It's the way that they lived their own life and how in line with their perception of character and virtue that was. But we get sucked into thinking that we're less of a person if we're making less than the person next to us. And honestly, the social media era has only accelerated that in my mind because everybody puts their best face forward. There are a ton of what I think malign influencers out there who communicate that explicitly, whether it's, the guys who get on TikTok and are showing off sports cars and money and girls and saying, like, this makes me more of a man than you, or the women or men who are showing off fancy clothes and kind of painting that as like the outcome. And I got to tell you, I mean, one of the benefits of my work is I've been privileged to be around people who have more than those TikTok influencers do. And, and when you talk to them, that message those influencers are communicating is not true. Like these people ultimately, if they've placed all of their identity in their net worth, even when they achieve a net worth that most of us would be shocked by, they realize that that's empty, right? And that's hard to absorb because when you're not worth that much, when you're struggling, it's easy to say, well, that's fine for rich people to say. But I like Zig Ziglar has this great quote. Everybody knows money won't make you happy, but everybody wants to find out for themselves. And that's kind of true. But it really is true. You got to reflect and know that like chasing this thing at the exclusion of these other more important things is just a path of self-destruction in many ways.
And I think not even I don't think that's what in my experience that I don't really see like that's what the intention people set out
No,
to be.
no,
Like people have this good intention of like security,
totally.
safety. But then this is why I want to bring this up because I thought this was great in your book at how you talk about Ebenezer Scrooge. So you write about Ebenezer Scrooge, and the quote that I liked most was, "No one watches a production of A Christmas Carol and yearns to be Ebenezer Scrooge, and yet every day some of us live as he did." So like there's this part of us that when we talk about how much we're trying to save or why we're trying to save, it's usually with good intent of making
Totally.
ends meet, of making sure people are taken care of. I just want, and I think you even mentioned in your book too that most of the people, I forgot where it was, but I think you mentioned how like most people you talk to, uh, Importantly, given the subject of this book, not a single person of the hundreds or perhaps thousands I've asked has ever mentioned wealth or possessions. Often the people they describe live humbly, but they live well. They live fully human. So we have this like intent to use money for a means to take care of things, to make sure people are safe, secure. And yeah, if we have some more to do something to get ourselves, but then all of a sudden we don't realize we're Scrooge looking in the mirror.
Totally.
Like
And
like
that's, and you're totally spot on, which is like the vast majority of people don't go into this with ill intent. And they would never say your net worth is your worth. And they don't think that about others, right? And so it's more an unconscious psychology we adopt. And I know for myself, like one of the things that I struggle to overcome even to this day is growing up without a lot of money and living at a time, early in life, there were days we didn't have enough food. I didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't have enough to go to the doctor. So I still carry this like scarcity mindset in my head, even though I got that now. And so my bias is to like hoard and to seek security and financial stability because I still remember what it was like, even though I'm far from that point. So we all carry these like experiences with us that bias the way in which we engage, even if we have the best of intentions. And so that's why, in the book, we start with the mindsets, right? Which is getting people, because I think the most important point is not for me to tell you how much is enough, not for me to tell you what you should buy, whether you should have the car you have, or I'm not in a position to judge that at all, right? That's a deeply personal decision. It's to say, hey, think consciously about the mindset that you have so that you're not unconsciously falling into behaviors. And then the rest of the book, I try and talk through the major ways we encounter money with earning, with spending, with giving, with investing, with saving, and at least just point out, both through the research and the anecdotes that we can acquire, here is what the research would say on this is what good spending looks like. This is what generosity looks like and what it unlocks in you. You've got to pick what that looks like for you. But I can at least help tell you what I've learned, what I've heard from others, and what the research is saying so that you can make more conscious decisions about each of those things in your life rather than just unconsciously falling into behaviors that may or may not be correct.
I'm glad you brought up the different beliefs and how I grew up because this is one of the things that I've learned in couples and marriage counseling. I'm sure you have probably dealt with this in your line of work
Yeah.
there. I always say like there's a couple of areas in particular as a counselor where I say I've learned a lot about how to address finances. One of them for sure is working with gambling. When I work with gambling, there's always talk about finances. And I'm always grateful for that because I can then do that with other populations that I work with. But also one that comes up too is marriages and families. So I always say like when you work with marriages and couples, money will come up without you even having to bring it up. At some point it gets brought up. So this is why I want to ask you about this because we have two people who normally have had different upbringings with money. And then we think if we can just add up the ones and zeros, that will resolve everything, right? So you have one person who thinks we're spending way too much and they're worried about what that's going to do. You have another person who's like, we are well off than we could ever be. This is what I thought when I did this earlier on, that if we just sat down and looked at the numbers and we could say, look, you're doing well. Like that doesn't work. That that does not work just explaining the ones and zeros. And that's where I get the sense that like stuff like this book that you have is what's missing for people to understand money and to be able to have conversations around money from a different aspect than budgeting 101 or investment 101. But this gets into the part of purpose, flourishing, impact, and understanding. So I don't have a particular question for this with you, but I'm just curious when we see that happening, why doesn't just saying let's add up the numbers and this will
Yeah,
resolve thing? Why doesn't that work? Because we sometimes make it seem like money is really just adding the numbers.
totally. So, a quick aside, I think all premarital counseling should involve mindsets around money. My wife, just so you get some comfort, Andrew, and whatever your experience was, my wife actually used to be a marriage counselor. And in fact, she was a marriage counselor while we were dating. And so I joke, I was the only like premarital counseling where I had to take a million tests and my wife was the one grading them. So I don't know how I made it through, but it was, I felt like the most thoroughly vetted husband in the world by the time we got there. But if you look at the stats, money is one of the biggest reasons people get divorced, right? Differences in money, disputes about money, um, children and the way of raising children is one of the other big ones. And those are two things you don't talk about in premarital counseling a lot, right? And so I'm a big fan of couples in particular need to deeply understand the way they think about money before they get in. You need to understand the dollars and cents as well. Like if one person's coming in with a ton of debt and one person isn't, you got to know that before you get married and you got to talk about that and you got to talk about what that looks like. So there's a practical component of it, but there's really a component of like what are the lessons you had growing up about money? How do you feel about it? How do you feel about spending? How do you think about saving? What's your position on your professional career and how you want to navigate that so that you're not running into that down the road without having reflected on it? Because otherwise, you kind of, like you said, it's kind of a taboo topic. Even couples don't talk about it a lot. But then when you hit a problem, you've never talked about it before. You're encountering that problem without having engaged it. And I think a lot of that does come down not just to financial mismanagement or differences on the practicalities, but on the mindsets people bring, like the way that they spend, the way that they save and aren't generous. One person wants to be very generous, the other doesn't. One person wants to invest totally in their professional career to acquire as much as possible. One person wants balance. And so you haven't aligned your mindsets. There's actually a chapter in the book that's nominally on money and kids rather than on money and relationship. And I'm of the opinion that families in particular need to talk deeply about these mindsets and not just talk about them. In the book, I talk about financial apprenticeship, which is the act not just of adults explaining to kids how money works and how you think about money, but giving them insight into the way that you're making decisions so that by the time they leave home, they're equipped to make those decisions. And I think that starts strangely with a discussion that has nothing to do with money, which is what is your vision for the good life, right? Like in the book, we actually have one in our family. I say every family should have a mission, vision, and values, just like a company would, right? Where you're explicitly talking about like who are we as a family? What do we value? And again, I can't write that for you because I'm not you. But your mission statement should reflect what you believe. You should have values that you believe in as a family. And often then those help translate into discipline. They translate into money, right? If part of your family values is generosity and service towards others, well, then that should be reflected in your financial life, right? That should be a core part of what you're doing. And so I think that initial discussion and then really giving kids and as spouses engaging together on how do we invest? How do we save? What is our posture towards generosity? What is our posture towards giving money to kids eventually? Because again, you want to talk about couple friction. It's hard enough when it's just two of you. Once it's six of you, like in our family, you certainly reach those points of friction. And so um, I want to anchor people in those kind of deeper philosophic discussions along with some practical advice so that you're not talking about these problems when they're problems. You're talking about them when things are good, when you have the freedom to do so, so that when the hard times hit or when you face difficult decisions, you're equipped to make those in a sensible and aligned way.
Yeah, I've always looked at when you work with like couples and families, the other time that it can come up, and it's even a much more challenging, difficult time is when there's been a passing in the family.
Totally.
And then all of a sudden, like when someone passed and they're going through, stuff from like a will, and I can't tell you the amount of times I've heard of an argument or I don't talk to them anymore because of what happened with this, and usually it's because of something money around the passing of like a loved one. And it always comes up because you don't have to wait long for someone to realize like they often grew up with just different perspectives on money or about money. And there was just not a lot of guidance. There was not a lot of like, how quickly do we go from no, you can't have money, you don't pay bills, to all of a sudden like now you're thrown into what we call adulthood to manage that. I remember I learned like nothing in school about finances. I
Oh,
always tell people I remember one class, it was in high school. It was called economics, but I had to learn about half the class had oil, half the class had money. You had to go through this experiment of like trying to get oil. I had no oil and no money, but I learned like nothing about finances from it. But then also I remember, and this is where I like to just kind of bring up the work that I do in counseling is that I used to work with uh, youth and uh, adult males in like residential and group homes where they lived. And we went through like everything as far as like, treating the substance use, but then we also went into like skill building, right? And we
yeah.
would talk about things of like what it is to really just have skills to like function. And I remember one of them used to be like balancing a checkbook. Like they
Oh
pretended
my,
how to balance a checkbook. They practiced how to like sign it. And I don't even know if any of them have to do that anymore. But I'm like, that's how we prepare people to deal with money.
it's
Like that,
crazy, right?
that's
Like
how
we,
we,
and a lot of parents do that. And we all, the funny thing is, again, there's no malintent. Like parents want the best.
right, right.
We want nothing more than for our kids to have better lives than we do. And yet, a shocking number of families, the school system lets us down because there's often not financial literacy as a part of school, which I think is a huge problem. Some school systems are fixing that now, but I think it should be like a elementary, middle school thing through high school, just financial literacy, learning about concepts. And at home,
Absolutely.
it's like crazy to think we raise kids, we don't give them insight into our financial lives, we don't teach them about anything. And then at 18, we hand them the keys and say, like, good luck, and expect them to make great decisions, right? And that was one of my learnings writing this. I'd say the Money and Kids chapter was the one I learned the most from, especially talking to families that were doing this really well, to be honest. Um, and it really convicted us on some of our practices. So our kids are 5 to 12. We have four of them. And we basically decided, even with a 5-year-old, we're going to start having age appropriate discussions about money. So we now have a ledger system in our house. So we don't give the kids cash. We do pay them for chores and things like that. We could talk about that. It's not a lot, but we put it in their ledger as like a bank account, and then they have columns for saving, spending, and giving. And so when they want something that's not like a core part, they have to buy it with their own money, and we pay for it, and then we take their numbers out of their ledger, and we actually have them write the entries with us so they understand what's moving around. At the end of the year, if they've saved, we give them a return on their savings for that year. The oldest is now in an actual investment account because he's 12. So I gave him my financial advisor, and they meet independently without me. And he's not big enough to be a real client, but like the advisor is great about it because he's working with them, and I feel like another adult doing it other than me is good. For giving, we multiply whatever they're willing to give during the year just to encourage them to do that. And we then have conscious discussions about what that looks like, why we're making our decisions. Like one of the things we try and do with the kids, I have this chapter on earning with purpose because I think we have a crisis right now of people not feeling purpose and meaning at work. And often your dad would leave the house and you're just like, ah, he's just getting a paycheck. You never talk about like why. And so when the kids ask, like, why do you have to go to work? I'm starting to take them on business trips with me so they can see what I do. I'm starting to explain, like, why I enjoy what I do, what impact it has on others, and why that's a financial necessity. And then even on like spending, what's funny now, because we teach the kids principles about like not buying experiences, not stuff, uh, trying to be modest in your spending, never buying something because we have a rule that if you want something because someone else has it, that you can't have it. Basically,
Mm.
it's like a status thing. But now it's funny because if I buy something that, the kids are like, oh, dad, how much did that cost? Why'd you get that? And it's actually kind of great, right? Because
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
accountability for me, but it means they're like internalizing it. And what most adults don't realize is if you're not teaching them explicitly, they're still learning, they're observing, right? And sometimes we're like implicitly kind of giving them the wrong messages out of the gates that are going to hurt them over time. And so that accountability is actually good. Like we have a family generosity meeting now once a year where we do our giving together, and we don't tell them exactly what dollars are at play for us because there are some downsides to that. But we sit down, we pick charities for the kids so they don't do something crazy. And we all decide together, like, what are we giving to that year? And the kids decide what they're giving to, and we give them some money to give to charity. And that was the number one trait of every functional wealthy family that I encountered in researching the book, was they all had family giving opportunities. It was like the number one thing that they did together. And it was awesome. This was our first year really doing it. And it was one of the coolest conversations. And I'll stop rambling in a moment, but one quick story. We didn't know how much they'd give. We told them we'd love it if you give 10% or more, but you get to decide. You can give zero, you can give whatever you want. And the very first kid we went to was my 12-year-old. And he picked the health charity related to my daughter. One of my daughters has a health condition. He picked a health charity related to that. And he tried to give 100% of what he had. And we were like, whoa. And then two of the other immediately said, I want to give 100% of what I have. And my wife and I were like, we don't know what we were expecting, but it wasn't that, and we didn't let him give 100%. So we had a good discussion. We encouraged him because that was mind blowing and awesome. But we said, look, we want you to help you be prudent. And, we'd let him give up to 30% and then we would top him off. But it was convicting for my wife and I because they're like, man, these kids, they're wired to like want to be generous with others and help others much more so than we are. And it was just this cool way of us as a family talking about what is the value of money and how much does that matter versus the ability to help others. And anyway, I think it can lead to some really enriching conversations if you're thoughtful about it.
Yeah, I just think that it's missing because then all of a sudden, like money become. I even say in one of my talks, I do all about money in relation to like mental health, substance use, gambling, and stuff. And part of it is like, as we think that it's difficult to talk about politics or religion or sex, that money is still number one. That people would prefer to have a conversation about politics than they would about finances. But we don't prepare people to really understand it, to really know how to have those conversations. So I'm not surprised it's where it's at. Like I'm not taken back that we don't see more people talking about or having more conversations about it because we haven't really prepared people to be able to have that dialogue. I want to ask you, the means to an end part is fascinating because it's another part of your book that I read and I was like, oh yeah, like I deal with this sometimes, and that is when people work and they make money, all of a sudden like that means can change, right? It can be from I want to be able to take care of things, safety, wellness. I want to be able to spend on some good things or some experiences. But then I want to talk about one of the things that then kind of comes up is retirement. And I see this pretty often when I work with a older population where all of a sudden this idea of retirement is like a finish line of all this years of hard work, and then they hit retirement and they struggle.
Yep.
They have a really hard time. I've seen this time and time again when I've worked with individuals who are like right at that point. I've seen them when they are so excited where they're counting down the days. Then I see it where shortly after they are struggling with this transition. So any thoughts on that or anything you can share about like when we talk about means to an end, it can shift, but also one of those things that comes up a lot is retirement. And then sometimes it's not always what people thought it was or what it would be, and that then creates just new challenges and everything.
Yeah, so I don't agree with the concept of retirement as we define it today. This is my publisher thinks this is the one that will get me the nastiest notes or the most controversial. And to clarify, what I'm not saying is like you don't have to run as hard at 75 as you run at 25. If you got health challenges and stuff, there comes a time at which all of us will have to stop working, right? So this is not meant to be a criticism of anyone or to say that at 85 you need to be working 50 hours a week somewhere. We go through different phases of life. But I don't think human beings are wired to live without any sort of purpose for the way in which they direct their talents for their own benefit and the benefit of others. And the research is stacking up to prove exactly what you're talking about right now. Starting with psychology, There's a lot of research now that retirement is initially really great for people psychologically, particularly those who were in professions they didn't love, that they get this initial boost, almost like buying that new car, where they feel happy for a little while, but then they lose their sense of purpose and that happiness degrades over time and they actually become more unhappy. They become socially isolated. They often experience greater feelings of loneliness. They don't get that intrinsic sense of meaning from directing their talents towards something that they're good at that can help the world, that sense of meaning and purpose in their work. And the craziest research to me is there are even a huge number of physical problems with retirement. So the Social Security Administration has found that delaying retirement even 1 year reduces all-cause mortality by 24%. Delaying retirement lowers rates of heart disease, dementia, mobility problems. The research is overwhelming that this conventional view of retirement, which is I'm going to work really hard, then I'm going to do nothing, is bad for you psychologically, bad for you physically, bad for you socially, right? And we've observed this sometimes in older people in our lives. And so my concept is save for freedom, not retirement, because I think what most people actually want, they don't want to do nothing. They want some agency over their lives. They want to be able to spend their time on the things that are most impactful, that give them the most joy, that are the best use of their talents. That's a flourishing life, right? And so my encouragement is it's good to build a financial safety net. And we talk about that in the saving chapter, the investing chapter, spending. Look, building a financial safety net, building material stability actually is important. And there are small disciplined things that you can do that make that possible for almost anyone. But that freedom is not so you can do nothing. That freedom is so that you can shape your life and your professional career in a way that's most rewarding for you and rewarding for others. And I think the cool thing about that is your number to reach that point is actually lower if you think of it that way. And so a small example, like let's say you want to retire, you want to live off $75,000 with the 4% rule, which is kind of the common rule that people use, you got to save $1.9 million if you just want to quit work and do nothing and live off $75,000 a year. If you say, I want to live off $75,000 a year, but I'm going to retire from this profession. I'm going to go be an executive coach, or I'm going to work at a nonprofit, or I'm going to work part time and I'm making $35,000 a year. That lowers your savings goal to $1 million, right? It takes almost $1 million off that, and you're still engaged. You've got a community, you're physical, you're mobile, you're psychologically more healthy. And so I just want to rewire people not to think about this like finish line of I'm going to quit and do nothing, but rather, how can I increasingly get the liberty in my own life, the freedom in my own life to live life on my terms, even though I want to continue to be productive? And I think that's better for the world. I mean, honestly, one of the things I'm most sad about is we got so many talented older people in society that we're not getting advantage of all those things they could bring, right? Like people discount older people in our society and they bring a huge amount of wisdom, experience, etc. And I think we'd all be better if they were directing that in positive ways.
Yeah, that's super important. I think that needs to be heard about and talked about. It's just it seems like that's part of the idea of money and saving is this means to an end for retirement. Like, and we look at this as like this is a process we all go through, and it just doesn't seem to line up with like what the actual experience is. So
Mhm.
I'm really glad you talked about that. All right, I have two questions left for you. This is something I imagine we could talk about for hours. It's such a fascinating topic. One thing I wanted to ask you was when I started this conversation with you, in the work that I do, I hear a lot about finances, often because we talk about how, well, substance use is causing financial problems, or the mental health is causing financial problems, or as comes up quite a bit, you are gambling and that is causing problems. We tend to look at it like as the individual's behavior is what is causing them to have this financial stressors. And while that is no doubt accurate, I think the thing that we miss is understanding the impact that finances can have in general on people. And I want to bring this up because, like I told you, I've read a lot of books from podcast guests, and I can't tell you. I almost want to go back when I have time one day to go back to all those books. I can't tell you the times I've missed where when someone describes their story, right? Like I got a lot of people who share their story. I can't tell you the amount of people who finances was a problem before the substance use was a problem. And they're talking about a childhood or growing up with parents where finances was a, a significant issue, but then all of a sudden the substance use happens, the mental health happens, and then that kind of takes over as the main part of the story or the cause that we often say these issues create the financial problems. When I see a lot of times, sometimes the financial stuff is happening way before that, but we don't want to address at all that part of what's going on here is because of some financial issues that have now impacted people greatly. I feel like we're always seeing it backwards. And then even when I read more and more stories, I read about problems with money growing up, not having enough to do this, parent having to work four jobs, having to do this to make ends meet. And I'm like, the substance use hasn't even started yet, and I'm seeing issues. But then we want to say, well, it's the substance use that's causing problems. It's the mental health that's causing financial problems. I I want to say my unofficial theory, and this is what I want to ask you, is that sometimes substance use and mental health become the scapegoat for why there's financial issues when maybe we never really knew how to talk about finances. Maybe we never knew how to have those conversations. We can't just say it's because of the substance use or the mental health. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts with that? Because I've been seeing that more and more as I've focused on money and finances and kind of how it gets played out in the work that I do. Where do you take everything I just threw at you with that?
Man, such a great topic to dig into. And I approach it with some humility because I know you're far more experienced and thoughtful on the topic of addiction recovery in particular than I am. But I see the same interrelation in that I think a lot of the things that manifest in whatever behavior you may have, whether that's a substance abuse problem, a financial problem, are rooted in similar underlying psychological issues or mindsets, perhaps that you grew up with, that then manifest in different ways, right? And there's, the same thing that might chase you to seek or lead you to seek fulfillment in substance abuse might be the same psychological issue underlying that leads you to seek fulfillment in acquiring things, right? And in chasing stuff, right? And seeking your identity through stuff. It might be the same insecurity that causes you to want to kind of hoard or to be undisciplined about the way in which you manage money. And that's why I think the mindset part is so important because I think unless you learn to address the underlying mindsets that you approach life with, right, generally, and whether those are orienting you towards the life that you want, then those bad mindsets can come out in different ways, right? And certainly they're mutually reinforcing, like you mentioned, like if you develop a gambling addiction, your financial life will suffer, right? And so there is an interrelation there and they can build on each other and make each other worse. But really, unless you address the mindset problem, you can't fix the others. I mean, one of the interesting stats I encountered in this book, thinking about wealthy people, is that substance abuse rates are actually higher for the children of the very wealthy than they are for middle and upper middle income people. For example, it tends to be a bit bifurcated between low income and high income people for different reasons. And I think one of those reasons is those people just don't, many of those children of the wealth grow up without either they don't have a parent in the home who's attached to them because their parents have been pursuing that, or they've kind of seen that wealth isn't going to make them happy and they don't know where else to find it. And so they seek it through unhealthy behaviors, right? A shocking statistic was that petty crime rates like shoplifting and things are actually higher among the super wealthy, the children of super wealthy as well, because they're seeking some sort of thrill to kind of, because everything else just seems kind of meaningless if they've grown up in the wrong mindsets. And I think that gets to your point, which is like, it's not just the absence of money that leads you to this, and it's not just the substance abuse that might lead you to have money problems. There's an underlying set of beliefs you have about yourself and the world around you that contribute to both of those things, right? And if you don't learn to address those and really think about those in a positive way and orient yourself to the right behaviors, you don't know how those are going to come out. And it may be in your financial life, it may be in other elements of your life. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question. Again, I approach the topic of addiction with humility because I know that's your wheelhouse, but I do see a lot of the commonality that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think overall, my hope is we can see that it's not just finances become the devastation or the consequence of some of the challenges and behaviors, but also like some of the issues can actually the root cause can be finances.
Oh, totally.
Like we
Yeah, and I
don't really view it as a root cause. We tend to see it as a an after effect or a symptom of something, but we really often don't look at like how finances can be a root cause of something. It usually then becomes something else that gets pointed at, and that is what causes finances. I'm trying to get this shift to understand that finances is so important and powerful that it can itself be the root cause of some of the
100%.
things that go on.
I'll tell you, people living like I have multiple examples of people I know who look wealthy on the outside but are living well beyond their means. And the stress of that precarious financial situation is what leads them to substance abuse, right? Because they just don't know how to allay that anxiety without it. Like I have friends who have really had major problems with alcohol and other substances because of the stress that their financial life is putting on them. And that's why I think if you get that right and you get disciplined about it, that gives you a lot of freedom so that you're not that level of anxiety is gone from your life. And that's one of the topics in the book we haven't talked about because we've talked a lot about the purpose and flourishing. There's also a foundational element of just good small decisions and discipline around your financial life that prevent you from the perils of kind of falling off the cliff, being super thoughtful about debt, investing even in small amounts early and over a long period of time, being disciplined about what you spend on and making sure it's oriented properly. Because if you can keep that house in order, um, that is money problems are a huge source of stress, I think, that lead people to really unhealthy behaviors to try and deal with the stress that they're feeling around money problems. Sorry, I misunderstood the question. I think you're spot
No,
on.
no, I think it all of it relates in how we're talking about it. So I think this is even more the reason why this stuff should be coming up much earlier on. We should have things for people to have these conversations, to have this discussion, because it tends to happen when things are really at a difficult spot. Like we now
Totally.
have to talk about it. Not that we want to, but we have to because of now we're in debt or because now we don't know what we're going to do for this. So it gets brought up, but often because things have gotten to such a challenging point. My last question, and I don't know if it's a question, but I just kind of want to throw this out to you, and maybe it's more of giving you your flowers for what this book does because I really think this is a necessary thing for people to understand. When I do a talk when I present on breaking the silence on money,
Hmm.
and part of it is to help us to realize the impact of finances, but also to have better conversations with the people that we work with. I give the example of in counseling, we do intakes, right? And we ask a lot about your history. Um, we don't always ask about finances. I say one of the things we ask about is, are you employed? And then we sort of assume if you're employed, that means finances
Yeah,
are
you're fine.
good. If you're unemployed, that must be. But like we don't dive into that nearly enough. Like I said before, in gambling, you do because there is such a thing as like financial recovery. Like you ask about, it's been one of the greatest things to get into the work of gambling. Has made me a lot more comfortable talking with people about money, asking about money, and providing what I strive to do is a safe space to talk about finances. So one of the things that I want to share with you is what I try and talk with people about, and this has been one of my like sounding points about this is financial recovery is emotional, relational, and psychological. It's not just numerical. You can fix the numbers and still feel financially broken. And
Yes.
and it's not a question, but I think your book helps to heal that broken. I think like your book is something that is not just trying to say, here, let me add up numbers for you, or let's teach you how to save, and then everything will be okay. This is what I'm talking about, where we need more of this in order to help people heal and to flourish with finances, because adding up the numbers is is not the solution. So I don't have a question. I don't know if you want to respond to that, but I just, as I've said that over and over again in some of my talks about finances, to me, this is what I think about, and how can we actually keep people, help people heal and flourish, instead of let's just try and fix the numbers and yet the person still feels financially broken inside.
Yeah. Well, I'm deeply honored that you would say that, and it's an incredibly gracious thing to say. And the truth, Andrew, is like I have a day job. I write mostly because of the mission I feel about the things I write about. It's not a huge part of my professional career as such. Um, and so really one of my missions in life is to help people flourish. It's opportunity creation because I feel so deeply indebted to those who created opportunity for me. Like I told you a little bit of my story, there are a lot of folks along the way who made it possible for me to do so many amazing things in my life that many people who grew up in the circumstances I did don't, right? And so I think talent is universal, opportunity is not. And I think the more we can do to extend opportunity to people and to help them live fulfilling lives, that's the mission I want to be on and others want to be on. And that's the reason I wrote this book is I just didn't feel anyone was addressing this really critical topic in the context of like, how do I live a good life? Right? We're getting some practical advice, and that's important, but we weren't connecting it to like, man, this topic is so central to your day-to-day life. We all need money, we all touch it. It's destructive and it's good, but there aren't a lot of people talking about how it fits in the context of the lives we want to lead. And that was why I wrote it. Look, maybe it's imperfect, and I'm sure I don't have all the answers, and I'm sure there will be criticisms of the book that some of which are spot on, I'm sure. But my hope was this could ignite a conversation with individuals, with families, where they're just more conscious about talking through this and they don't ignore it and they don't sweep it under the rug and they place money in its proper place, not as like the only thing that matters, not as the core of your identity, but as this thing that we got to deal with. And we got to make it targeted towards living a good life, right? And so that's my hope for everybody who's listening is like, and you're wired this way, I can totally tell. I want you to lead the best life you can possibly lead. Like, I want everybody on this planet to experience the best life they can possibly experience. And if I can play a small role in helping in this small component of what's happening, that would be incredibly encouraging to me. And that's my hope for the book is that it in some way helps people to accomplish that.
Yeah, incredible conversation, John. I imagine we could talk about this, for a long time, but we can't even get to everything in the book. There is so much in there, but I think this is such a good conversation dialogue for people to learn about not only the impact of finances, not only what we talk about with good money and trying to flourish, but also that you can have conversations about money that 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 are compassionate, kind, caring, productive. Like it is a tough topic, but it can be done. And you can have those safe spaces to be able to address those things. And part of it is this is what a lot of people go through and experience. When we talk about trying to relate so much on like what people go through with like substance use or what people go through with mental health, and talk about something that we can all relate to, but yet we
Oh,
struggle to all talk about it.
yeah.
So this isn't like a no one else is going through this, or is this just me? Like this is definitely something that impacts all of us. And I think that's a really good first step to take with then being able to have these conversations. So I really appreciate this opportunity to read the book and to talk to you about it, because this is something that is does not come up very often. So with all that being said, this is your final moment here. Anything you want to leave listeners with, audience members with anything that you got going on, or a final message? Now's your time to share that with them.
No, look, Andrew, first I want to say thank you to you for the work that you're doing through this podcast and through your work and for having me on. And my encouragement to everyone is like, look, this is a super important topic. Um, I want everyone who's listening to reflect deeply on they are capable of flourishing. They've got dignity and self-worth, no matter what position you're in, whether you're rich or poor, whatever situation you're in. And I want them to dig into that and really reflect on what they want for their lives. And then just have the courage to try and take the steps necessary to enable that life they want, to paint that picture and take the steps. And I don't think money is all of that. I think money is going to be a piece of that in every person's life, as you said, which was one reason I was so compelled by this. It's not the whole picture, but it's something that's every single one of us has to worry about this. And so if you haven't taken the time to reflect on it, talk about it with your friends, your spouse, your kids, the best time to start is today, right? And to kind of weave this into the life that you want to lead. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I hope people do enjoy the book if they get a chance to read it. And again, just love the work that you're doing and the mission that you're on.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. So, for listeners, the book is Good Money: 6 Steps to Building a Financial Life with Purpose. We will have links in the podcast notes to where you can get the book, where you can learn more about what John's doing. But this is such a incredibly important topic. I can't thank you enough for this work that you did and for the chance to read it and talk about it, because this does have a significant impact on the people that we serve and listeners. So once again, want to thank you for the conversation, everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
One quick thing before you go. If you've gotten value from this show, from this episode, or any episode, the best thing you can do to support is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I'm not asking for anything elaborate. Tap the stars, write one sentence about what this show means to you. It helps more people in the behavioral health and recovery space find us. I appreciate you more than you know.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's Andrew J. SCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media. Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.